Today's daf we're going to be learning is Yevamot daf Yud Aleph. This week's daf, the learning for the next week, is sponsored by Ira and Natanya Slomowitz for the Refuah Shlema of Devorah Diner, Devorah Rachel Bat Ahuva and Harav Shlomo. And today's learning is sponsored by Hadran Women of Long Island in honor of Hadran and Rabbanit Michelle for her leadership in furthering Talmud study and for inspiring us Long Island learners. We are not only virtual chavrutot, we also have become chaverot. That's what a wonderful group, and thank you very much. Okay, we are now going to get started with where we ended yesterday. I'll do a quick review of the end of yesterday's daf. We had a machloket, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, about a very specific issue. What happens when the Abam does chalitza with the woman, right? So he's supposed to marry her. Instead, he decides to do chalitza. It's clear to everybody that after he does chalitza, he's not allowed to marry her. But it's not because she was married to, we don't revert back to Eshet Ach, that she was the wife of his brother, and it's karet, it's severe, but it's an Isur Lav, and it comes from the word lo yivneh, right? Kol asher lo yivneh et beit achiv, okay, which is, right, lo yivneh should have been lo bana, should have been, right, kacha yaseh la'ish, right? We're still Shushan Purim today. So, right, this is what is done to the man who doesn't build his brother's legacy, doesn't continue it, but it should have said lo bana. This is what we say to the man, right? It's the declaration they make when he decides to do chalitza. She says the following words, and then we say it should have said didn't build. It says lo yivneh, which means he cannot build it in the future, which means he can't decide later, oh, you know what, I should have married you and married. He's not allowed to do that. But that's a simple lo taseh. I say simple because it's not as severe. It's still Torah law. It's not like it's rabbinic, but it's not as severe as karet. And we'll see, right? So that's important. And we'll see what the difference is. One of the main differences is that kiddushin tufsim in chayvei lavin, right? If it's just a lo taseh and they get married anyway, it's a valid kiddushin. If it's karet, it's not a valid kiddushin. But everyone agrees that that's a lo taseh. What about the other brothers, though? What's her relationship to the other brothers? Since they didn't do the chalitza, maybe lo yivneh is irrelevant to them. And that's what Rish Lakish says. Rish Lakish says it's not isur lav of lo yivneh. They all revert back to being an eshet ach. They're basically now, because they had nothing to do with the yibum, they revert back to being brothers of Ruvain that can never marry Ruvain's wife. So they're isur karet with her. So this goes to arayot. If she falls to yibum to them, because let's say she does marry the other brother that she wasn't supposed to do the chalitza with her, then she wouldn't fall to Yibum to the brothers, and neither would her tzarot, because it's an Isur Karet. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's only Isur Lav. Okay, it's a lo taseh. The brothers, he was just a representative of all them, and she was just a representative of all the wives. So because of that, that's where we ended yesterday. It says they're just acting as representatives. So whatever is true for, in that case, it was Shimon, is going to be true for all his brothers as well. Shimon's a lo taseh, they're a lo taseh, which would mean that she would then fall to yibum to them. Now, she can't do yibum, so what does she do instead? Chalitza. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, in that situation, she does chalitza with the brothers, okay? Or the tzara can do theoretically even yibum, it seems like. So now let's read the question Rabbi Yochanan asked on Rish Lakish. The way it's going to work is, I'll give you the structure for the next little bit. He brings a braita to question Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish says, but you didn't read the whole braita. And the second part of the braita matches my opinion and not your opinion. So what are you going to do there? So then we're stuck, because really the first part follows Rabbi Yochanan, and really the second part follows Rish Lakish. And we're going to have to come up with some explanations. They're going to suggest one and then say that's not a good answer. And then they're going to suggest a different one, and they're going to actually explain the braita, both according to Rabbi Yochanan and according to Rish Lakish. And it's going to connect back to our favorite case of Achiv Shelo Bala Olam and the Machloket Rabbi Shimon Rabbanan. So it's another good way to do review of that case, which I somehow kept confusing every time I said it. Hopefully by this time, it'll be very clear. Okay, let's go. We're starting about 10 lines from the bottom of Yud Amud Bet. Eitivei Rabbi Yochanan LeRish Lakish. Eitivei means he's going to bring a difficulty on him from a Tanaitic source. Hacholet liyivim tov, v'chazar v'kid shava meit. That's exactly our case. He does chalitza. By the way, there's no charts today because this was a case we just saw yesterday. I didn't make a new chart of it. I'm not going to bring it up. It should be pretty clear at this point. It's a pretty simple case. And in general, the cases we'll see today don't really need the diagrams. Okay, we do have charts. There's charts on the page on the study guide. So there's a study guide that will help the flow, but none of the presentations of the characters. So now what happened? He does chalitza to her. He doesn't want to marry her. He doesn't want to do yibum. V'chazar v'kitsha, and then he does kiddushin. He marries her even though he wasn't allowed to, but it was an isur lav. So he marries her anyway, which means the marriage is valid. So then he dies. So then this chiyuv yibum, right? But what's the problem? Again, according to Rabbi Yochanan, which is the one who's bringing this as a question, and we're going to see the Braita matches his opinion perfectly, she should be chayve lavim to the brothers, which means she is obligated in yibum, but she can't actually marry them because there's a lo taseh, because they didn't do yibum in the first place. They did chalitza because they were represented, right? The brother represented them. So it was as if they did chalitza with her. She's not allowed to marry them, but it's only Yisur Lav. So there is a chiyuv yibum. We fulfill it through chalitza, right? Whenever you have yibum, but you can't do yibum because she really can't marry them. So they do chalitza, and that's fine. So that's exactly what it says. Tzricha chalitza mina achim. She has to do chalitza. So comes Rabbi Yochanan and he says, Bishlam al-Didi, this works perfectly for me. Damina chayve lavim ninu. Right? The other brothers are lav. Hainu tzricha chalitza mina achim. That's why she needs chalitza. But ela lididach. But according to you, amay tzricha chalitza should be isur karet. She should be p'tura, or tzara should be p'tura. Classic arayot, because it's eshetach. So comes Rish Lakish, as I promised, and he says, what are you talking about, though? Velit amech, according to you, ema seifa. What does the seifa say there? The end of that Braita says, if in any case, okay, again, just like we broke the law in the first case where he married her when he shouldn't have, if amad achamina achim v'kitsha, even though she's definitely, no matter what, she can't marry the brothers, right? The question is just, does she need to do chalitza or not from them? But if one of them decided to marry her anyway against the law, ein la alav klum. What does ein la alav klum? Ein la alav klum means they're not married. It's not a marriage. Why is it not a marriage? Well, if it's chayve lavim, it would be a valid marriage because kiddushin tofsim b'chayve lavim, right? The kiddushin is valid. If you marry someone, right, a man marries his mother, which is totally permitted by Torah law, karet, it's not a marriage. We don't view it as a marriage for any intents and purposes. So if it says here, they have no relationship, even though he did kiddushin with her, it's not a valid marriage. It must be, it's karet. And that's my opinion, not your opinion. So what are you going to do with that line? So now we're a little bit stuck. So the first option is, right, the chayve lavim ninu. And if, right, he just continues and he says, if it's chayve lavim, amayim alav klum, they should be married because kiddushin tofsim and chayve lavim. Remember, that means marriage is valid in a case where it's a chayve lavim, where it's forbidden by a lo taseh. So Amar Rav Sheshet, Seifa Atan LeRabbi Akiva, Damal, Ein Kiddushin Tofsim B'chayve Lavim. I didn't tell you this, but there's another opinion. There's a machloket about chayve lavim. Rabbi Akiva says even chayve lavim, even if it's just asur lo taseh. Remember, lo taseh usually means you get lashes for it, but you don't get death, right? You definitely don't get karet or death by the court. If it's just a regular lo taseh, even Rabbi Akiva thinks, no, it's not a valid marriage. So then we say, the seifa is according to Rabbi Akiva. There's a bit of a problem with this. What's the problem? Well, the first part of the Mishnah, Braita, was not according to Rabbi Akiva, because it was the case where he was a chayiv lavim with her. Remember, he did chalitza, and then he's not allowed to marry her. And yet we said it was valid because you need chalitza, which means it was a valid marriage with the second brother, with Shimon. And now she needs chalitza. Now she needs chalitza from the brothers. That means it was a valid marriage. So you'd have to say, which is even more difficult, the first part of the Braita was not Rabbi Akiva. And the first relationship that was done, right? We have two forbidden relationships here. One is she marries the one who did chalitza to her. And then one is after he dies without kids, she does marriage with one of the other brothers, which is also chayve lav. So you'd have to say in the first part of the Braita, it was not Rabbi Akiva because the kiddushin were tofsim. In the second part, it was Rabbi Akiva, and that's why the kiddushin were tofsim. They could have asked that question. They didn't ask that question, but maybe even their question is kind of that question, and we'll see right now. The litnei, it should say then, l'divrei Rabbi Akiva ein lo alav klum. If they were talking only according to Rabbi Akiva, they should have specified they were talking only to Rabbi Akiva, and maybe that's because of what I said a minute ago, which is not just because we want to mention that this is Rabbi Akiva and it's a unique opinion, but more so because the beginning wasn't Rabbi Akiva, and now we're talking within Rabbi Akiva. So maybe it actually is addressing the question that I raised, which is it doesn't really make so much sense. So now we're going to have a different, so that answer, kasha, is be'emet difficult. It's not a good answer. So let's try a different answer. So this is Rav Ashi. This is where we're going to get back to Achiv Shelo Ba'al Ha'olam. Rav Ashi sever like Rish Lakish umetaretz like Rabbi Shimon, and Ravina sever like Rabbi Yochanan and metaretz Rabbanan. This is your topic sentence. We don't yet know what all this means. The Gemara is going to explain it in a minute. So just basically, Rav Ashi is going to explain this Braita entirely like Rish Lakish, and it's going to be a case of Achiv Shelo Ba'al Ha'olam, and it's going to be according to Rabbi Shimon. This is what we call an ukimta. It's saying that even though the case didn't say it was Achiv Shelo Ba'al Ha'olam, meaning right where the younger brother was born later, it is going to be a case like that, okay? It's where we say, even though it didn't specify, we're going to say that this is in a unique case and not any case. If we say it's in any case, we really have no way because the Braita really contradicts itself. So we'd have to explain it this way. And Rav Ashi and Ravina Savalak Rabbi Yochanan and Mataritz Rabbanan. He's going to side with Rabbanan in the Machloket about Achiv Shelo Ba'al Ha'olam, and he's going to hold like Rabbi Yochanan in this machlok. So we're going to explain all this, so don't worry that you didn't follow yet. Rav Ashi sever like Rish Lakish, mitaritz like Rabbi Shimon. So now we're reviewing that sentence because it's kind of saying, okay, topic sentence, right? These are the two things we're going to do. Now we're going to explain this one. Hacholetz liivim to v'chazar v'kidsha tzricha chalitza min ha'achim. So now we're starting with the ratio. We're going to explain first the beginning, then the second. And each one's going to relate to different types of brothers. Okay, we're going to basically say there was Reuven and Shimon. Okay, those were our first two brothers. Reuven dies. Shimon does chalitza with the woman. There's another brother, Levi, okay, who was alive at the time from the beginning. So there's Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven marries her. He dies without children. She now marries. She does chalitza with Shimon, and then Shimon marries her. Okay, Now she falls to Yibum. Now the question is, when it says she needs chalitza min achim, what achim are we referring to here? Achim shelo ba'u la'olam. Now, what does that mean? Man achim hayilodim, ones that will be born, kiman ki Rabbi Shimon. Okay, what does that mean? She can't marry Levi because Levi is eshet achiv, right? What did we say? According to Rish Lakish. According to Rish Lakish, when Reuven dies and then Shimon does chalitza, her relationship with Levi now is the wife of the brother, and no future Yibum is going to override that. Kare, she's patra. But now this is only Rabbi Shimon, because if another brother is born, now it depends when he's born. Remember, according to the rabbis, if there's a brother born, excuse me for 1 second. Lost my voice on Purim. If another brother was born, once Reuven died, according to the rabbis, that son will never be permitted. That's Achiv Shelo Ba'al Ha'olam. She can never do anything with that son, or with that brother. So according to the rabbis, this is not relevant. But according to Rabbi Shimon, if the son is born, okay, let's start with where he agrees with the rabbis. Okay, this is a good review of that case. If the son is born after Reuven died, before Shimon did Yibum, that's exactly going to be the case where that brother is forbidden to her, because it was born, right? Me nolad yiben, died, then the kid was born, then they did Yibum, that son is forbidden. That's a classic case, even Rabbi Shimon. But Rabbi Shimon holds that if that kid was born, once she married Shimon. Now, in this case, it's not Yibum because he did chalitza and then he married her. But if the child was born when she's married to Shimon, we no longer care about the fact that he was a Yeled Shelo Ba'al Ha'olam, because now she was born, he was born while she was in this marriage with Shimon. So if Shimon were to die without children, she has a new relationship with this new brother. And he's not Achiv Shelo Ba'al Ha'olam. That's forbidden. So that's where she needs chalitza. Now you follow, because now we have two categories of brothers. We have Levi, who was alive at the time. He is Eshet Ach. She can never marry him because of the chalitza that was done. He reverts to Isur Karet. But the new brother, there was no Karet on him because he was never alive at the time of Reuven. He doesn't become an Eshet Ach. He's not a brother of Reuven because Reuven died before he was even born. And he's not Achiv Shelo Ba'al Ha'olam because he was born when Shimon was married to her. And according to Rabbi Shimon, that's right, Shimon and Shimon. But according to Rabbi Shimon, if the child is born when Shimon's alive, then that's just a regular brother for this purpose of chalitza and yibum. So she would do chalitza from that brother. Okay, so that's what it's saying here. And then, how do we explain the Seifa then? Well, the Seifa anyway worked perfectly to Rabbi Shimon, because now, what's it talking about now? If one of the other brothers, like Levi, who was alive at the time when Reuven was alive, which means he's now going to be Esherach, if he marries her and does Yibum with her, let's say, well, that's not a marriage at all because it was Yisor Karet and Ein Kiddushin Tofsim. Okay, so that's how we explained it according to Rabbi Shimon. According to Rish Lakish, which is according to Rabbi Shimon. Ravina Savarlak Rabbi Yochanan V'taritz La'aliba de Rabbanan. Now he's going to flip the Achiv Shelo Ba'alo Olam case. There we had it, the ratio was Achiv Shelo Ba'alo Olam case, and the Seifa was the other brothers, right? The brothers that were alive at the time. We're now going to flip it, and you'll see in a minute how this works. So Ravina holds like Rabbi Yochanan and explains it all, Liba de Rabbanan. Now remember, Rabbi Yochanan in the beginning made perfect sense, so we're going to leave the beginning as it was. From which brothers? Manachim, Achim Anoladim, the ones that were alive at the time. Because remember, Rabbi Yochanan holds they're all only Isur Lav. So therefore, she's chayav in Yibum, but she can't do Yibum because it's forbidden for her to marry them. So she does Chalitza. Kiman ki Rabbi Yochanan. That works perfectly with Rabbi Yochanan's approach. But Amar Acham min hayilodim bekidsha. Now, Esher Achiv Shelo Ba'alo Olam. If that son Yehuda was born after the first husband Reuven died, that son will be forever Isur Karet to the woman. So if that son got up, and now we have Levi's Isur Lav, but Yehuda, the fourth son, is Isur Karet. So if he gets up and marries her, then Ein La Lav Klum, Kiman Kirabanan. That holds with the rabbi's opinion, who holds any son that wasn't alive when Reuven was alive is Achiv Shelo Ba'alo Olam, Isur Karet, she can never marry him. And that's not because of Esherach, it's because of this Achiv Shelo Ba'alo Olam, this unique halacha, and therefore it's not going to be an actual marriage. So we've now explained it according to each of those opinions. Okay, now before we finish up with this topic, we have one last thing, which is a different machloket, which we're going to connect to this one. Now forget about the whole case we just learned. Now we're talking about a regular, very basic case. Itma, Habal Yevamot, Uba Achad ben Achim al Tzarata. Normally, what do we say? The brothers, we have, let's say, 3 brothers. One dies. Each brother marries one of his wives. One does Yibum. The next one marries her because there's no more Chiyuv Yibum. Now, we know that that's forbidden because only one is supposed to do Yibum. Then the rest are permitted to marry anyone else, but they can't marry the brothers anymore because, again, what's the question? What's the relationship between the other brothers and the second wife? It would be the same as the other brothers if Chalitza was done basically with the first one, because it's basically, the whole question that Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish were talking about is, do the other brothers revert back to being Eshet Ach, right? That she's their brother's wife and it's Karet? Or is it this Lo Yivneh? Now, there was no Chalitza here, but it's kind of the same. It's saying, you didn't do Yibum with her. Once you didn't do Yibum because you let the other brother do it, well, then you can never marry her again. Isur Lo Taseh. So that's the debate here. Okay, so one is you didn't fulfill this mitzvah say of livnot et beit achiv, and therefore you can't marry her again. So manda amar bekaret kirish lakish, manda amar baase ki Rabbi Yochanan. So they basically take a different machloket and they say this lines up exactly like Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish in the case that we saw previously. Okay, new topic. Now we're going to move in for this, and at least the next stuff. I forget if it even goes beyond that. I think maybe just for the next stuff, we're going to be in this topic of. Until now, this basically goes back to the beginning. The Mishnah gave 15 cases where she is forbidden and her tzara is forbidden, right? None of them can do yibum, and actually they're mutarot, right? They can go marry anybody they want without doing anything. Then if you remember, we said that there were a few other cases that weren't mentioned in the beginning. There was Rav, and which is going to be right here, okay? The tzara v'sotah. We're going to get to the tzara of a different bunch of other women and ask, or maybe give a halacha that they're also forbidden, or they're going to question maybe, are they forbidden or not? Meaning, right, is the same law of our Mishnah applicable in another case that's not necessarily mentioned in the Mishnah? And it's not necessarily 100% clear as a raya. Okay, so we'll see right now. Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav. Tzarat sota asura. This is something we referenced at the beginning, and I said we'll get to it soon and we'll explain it, so now we're getting to it. What's a sotah here? Now, a sotah in the Torah is usually a woman who It's not clear what happened, right? Her husband was suspicious of her. He goes and he says, my wife is talking to some other man. Then she gets warned, don't go into a room alone with this man. And then she goes into the room alone, but we don't know what happened in that room. And then since we don't know, we go through this whole ceremony. He brings her to the temple. We'll deal with that when we get there. I have a lot of interesting theories about the whole sota thing. I don't want to start talking about them now. That's sota. But when we're talking about a sota here, what we mean is a woman who actually had sexual relations and we know about it with her husband. Now, at this point, she is forbidden to her husband and forbidden to the person she had relations with, okay? Now, what about getting killed? So yeah, she's also supposed to get killed, but it could be, right, the courts generally didn't kill people in general. They didn't really do capital punishment. I see someone's asking. And, maybe there wasn't enough, she wasn't warned, all sorts of things. But anyway, yeah, why is she called a sota? It's a good question. Why not an eshet ish? You'll see why they call her a sota, because they want to make reference to the sugya about a sota. Okay, so now they say, sarat sota asura. So now the issue is, this is a very different issue, and I'll tell you why. Until now, and this is why they don't call her an eshet ish, would be classic arayot, okay? But in all the cases of the Mishnah, it was a case where the woman was permitted to her husband, and then she had an arayot relationship with her yabam, right? The one she's supposed to do yibum with. This is a different scenario entirely, but yet they're going to compare them. So I'll tell you the scenario. So now, what's the scenario? She is not allowed to be married to her husband anymore. She has to get divorced. What if she doesn't? What if she stays married to him and he dies? Does she have to do yibum if they die childless? Does she have to do yibum with the brother? Okay, now, it's not, again, she's not a rayot to the brother, so it's very different. If you wanted, you call it eshet ish because she is now eshet ish with the guy who, right? Or and there is no comparison, right? It's not a rayot. What she did was a rayot when she slept with the man, but her relationship with the yabam is not a rayot. But comes the Gemara and they say, and this is why they called her a sota, because they wanted you to look at the psukim about a sota, because a sota is basically a woman we suspect of, but if she really is, the Torah says she's tum'ah. Okay, the Torah says, if he really slept with her, then it says, right? And he didn't know, right? She went secretly with this man. And if she really was nitma'ah, became impure, meaning she slept with him, right? And then tum'ah vesektiva ke'arayot. It's like a rayot. So since this is an arayot situation, we're going to apply the same rules. And then her tzara will be forbidden. Now, again, you have to realize it's not really a comparable case, but Rav is comparing them. And the Meiri explains, a lot of the commentaries say, what are you talking about? Because she's not a rayot to the yabam. And that was all our cases. She's a rayot to the yabam, and that exempts the tzara. So the Meiri says, basically, it's that her connection to the yabam is through the husband. And her relationship with the husband is a rayot, basically. And that's why, since her whole connection to the yabam comes from the husband, so we're going to call this a rayot. There's other explanations given as well. You can look them up, but let's just go with that. So now they say, okay, but wait a minute. Mativ Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda now brings a question. And he says, look, okay, and we're going to get to this on Daf Pei Zayin Amud Bet. We're going to deal with this case much more in depth. This is a good example of another case that's a very difficult case to swallow. I'm going to warn you about it right now, but let's hold off till we get to it and we actually learn. A woman whose husband goes off and he basically, goes away, doesn't show up on the scene. Classic case of aguna, right? She doesn't know, is her husband alive or dead? We can rely on one witness, where normally we don't, and she can get remarried. What if the worst case scenario is what? Turns out he was alive and she got married thinking he was dead. She gets married. By Torah law, her first marriage is valid. Her second marriage is invalid, because she was still married. You can't marry someone if you're married, right? That would be Ein Kiddushin Tovsim, because it's Yisur Karet, right? That's basically classic eshet ish. But there's a machloket here, and we'll just read Rabbi Shimon. Now the rabbis came, though. They didn't want this situation to happen. They really wanted, if I remember correctly, it's all based on, and that's why I'm saying, let's hold off, because I don't remember all the details, and I didn't look it all up out of self. But what I seem to remember is, they rely on one witness, but they assume that the woman did her homework properly. They assume that a woman's not going to get remarried unless she really believes her husband's dead. And they think that if the husband really wasn't dead and she relied on this one witness, she didn't do her homework properly. And they wanted to prevent situations like this from people just relying on rumors and all that and getting remarried. So if you were to do this, they institute a penalty. So even though really she's married to the first husband and not to the second one, the penalty is we're going to be lechumra on all accounts. We're going to tell you, it's as if, it's like, even though you didn't, but it's like a sotah. You're going to basically have to divorce your first husband. You have to get divorced from your second husband. And they institute a whole bunch of chumrot in this situation. Okay. Again, I know you're all thinking this is very unfair to that woman, but again, there's background to it. Okay. There's logic to it. They want to make sure that women don't just jump into, oh, my husband's gone. Okay. I'm getting remarried. Right. And try to, always the problem with one witness is it's very easy to get one witness to lie, right? To lie under oath. So they don't want to create a situation like that. So they want you to understand that if your husband shows up on the scene, well, we're going to penalize you. So you better be careful so that, okay? Anyway, we'll get into, there's a lot of theories that I have about halachot that were instituted to prevent scenarios from coming about. Sota also, I view in that way. But anyway, we'll get there when we get to Sota. So now, he says, Rabbi Shimon says, Bi'ata o chalitzata me'achiv shel rishon poteret sarata. Now, what does this mean? This seems to indicate if she has yibum with the brother or chalitza. Now, she's not married to the first one. She's married to the first one on a doraita level. But the rabbis came and said, you need a get from your husband. What if she didn't get a get from the first husband? After her first husband shows up on the scene, she doesn't get a get from him. He dies childless. So what happens? They say, if she sleeps with one of his brothers or does chalitza, she exempts the tzara. So what do you see here? The tzara of a sotah, she's like a sotah, right? The halacha treats her like a sotah, even though she's not a sotah. And that's in the end what the Gemara is going to say. But the halacha treats her like a sotah. So what do you see here? Her tzara needs yibum, right? It just says poteret tzarata, right? But she'll be exempt if the first one does yibum or chalitza. But it seems like she would have to do yibum. So Amar L'charav, which means basically we're putting words in the mouth of Rav. He's not here to answer. That's not a contradiction. Amina la'ana sota deoraita v'at amar li sota de Rabbanan. Those two cases are totally not comparable. I was talking about a sota deoraita, someone who cheated on her husband. This is a case where she didn't cheat on her husband. She thought it was legit. It was fair and square. She thought he was really dead. She went by that one witness. She married this other guy. By Torah law, she's actually still married to the first. So it makes perfect sense that she would have to do yibum from the first husband. That has nothing to do with sota, where in a Torah law says she has to get divorced from the first husband. Here by Torah law, she's actually married to the first husband. So it makes perfect sense. So why are you comparing? To which the Gemara says, with the karile, my karile, that's such a good answer that what were you even thinking when you brought this as a question? So they said, well, we thought, kasavar kol detikum rabbanan ke'ein de'oraita tikum. When the rabbis institute some takana, which is in this case, they said this woman whose husband went overseas and she thought he was dead and he wasn't, they made her like a sota. So maybe they make her as if she's a sota in all, like for all intents and purposes, also for yibum. But that's what they thought, but that's not the case. Next question. Second question. Rav Mativ Ravashi. Nichnisa imo lesetel. We're back to a woman who's cheating on her husband, or he's suspicious that she's cheating on him. We don't really know. She goes into a room with the man that she was warned not to go into a room with. She goes in alone. Shahata imo kedei tuma. She was there enough time that something could have transpired. Asura lebeita. She's forbidden to her husband. V'asura le'echol b'truma. If he was a Kohen, she can't eat truma anymore. V'im mate, and if he dies childless before they got divorced, choletzet v'lo mityabenet. She does chalitza. She doesn't do yibum. Okay, she can't marry the other brother, but she does do yibum. So what do you see here? There is yibum for a sota situation. So again, Amar l'cha Rav, you're comparing apples and oranges. I mean, again, Rav didn't say this, but the Gemara answers for him. Amin l'cha ana sota vadai v'at amar li sota safek. That was a safek case. We don't know what happened in the room. I'm talking about a case where we know for sure. Where we know for sure, then she has to get divorced from her husband and she's forbidden to him. And if he dies, then she's exempt from yibum from the brother and the tzara is exempt. But if it's just a doubt and we haven't yet done the whole sota process, right? She's actually not supposed to be with her husband at that point, but it's not treated in the same way. And therefore, if he dies childless, she will have to do chalitza, okay? And the tzara can even do yibum, probably. So now, that's not a fair comparison. To which the Gemara questions, really, it's not a fair comparison. You're saying sota vadai and sota safek aren't the same in this area. I'm going to prove to you they are. Umayshna sota vadai, mishum dichtiv ba tum'ah. Sota vadai, we're assuming is a problem because we saw in the verse, it said, if she really slept with him, shichvat zera, right, where there was zera going on here, then it's hutam'ah, she's tme'ah. And tum'ah, we say, is like a rayot, and therefore, right, it basically means she was defiled, right, defiled by her adultery, which basically is an erva term. So now they say, sota safek nami tumaktivba. When it comes to a sota safek, also the word tuma appears there. Okay. Also by a when we have a doubt and the woman went into a room with a man alone and we don't know what happened there, she's also called tuma. How do we know this? Well, we have to bring a whole braita. In this braita, we're going to repeat both more today. We're going to deal with it in other contexts and also in tomorrow's daf. Titanya, which is good because even if you don't get it the first time, you get it the second, okay, or the third that we go through it. Titanya, Rabbi Yosef ben Kippur Omer, Mishum Rabbi Elazar. Hamachzil grushato min hanisuin. Okay, we're switching topics. Okay, you'll see why in a minute. This is a different halacha. Someone is married, they get divorced, and then she marries someone else in between, and then they get remarried then she gets divorced from the second guy or he dies, and she wants to go back and remarry her first husband. She's not allowed to, okay? Cohen can never return a divorcee, but a rate, because he can never marry a divorcee. So if it's his own wife, it doesn't make a difference. But someone else can remarry their divorcee unless she was married to someone else. And this machloka, Rabbi Yosef ben Kippur, what does it mean to be married to someone else? Does it have to be married mamash, or is kiddushin enough? You have to remember kiddushin and nisuin happen usually a year difference. Kiddushin is the first stage of betrothal, which we do under the chuppah with the ring. And that's what we read the ketubah in the middle to separate between that and the sheva brachot under the chuppah, which are the nisuin. And the nisuin is the chuppah part, okay, even though we do kiddushin under the chuppah. But in those days, kiddushin basically means you can't marry anybody else. You're designated to me, but when you're not yet permitted to be together. So they only have relations once there's nisuin. So the question is machzir grushato going to be effective, even if she was only engaged? I'll use the word engagement, even though it doesn't match our engagement. Our engagement has no halachic validity. Only our kiddushin that we do under the chuppah, which is the berkata erusin, it's called. So, which is engagement. So now, listen, Kippur says, ha-machzir grushato min hanisuin asura min ha'erusin muteret. If she was just engaged to be married to someone, okay, she had betrothal, kiddushin, but not nisuin, she can go back to her first husband. Why? Because it says in the verse there, Lo yuchal ba'ala rishon, on Dvarim Kaf Daled, Pasuk Daled, chapter 24, verse 4. Lo yuchal ba'ala rishon asher shilcha lashuv lekachta liyot lo liisha. The first husband can't take her back to be a husband, to be his wife. Acharei asher hu tam'ah, because she was right, she was defiled. Okay, ki to'avayi lifnei Hashem, because this is despicable in the eyes of God. Okay, now. Mina erusim mutechet, because it says acharei asher hu tam'ah. Tam'ah means defiled, usually defiled by having sexual relations with somebody else. So it would have to be that she had relations with someone through marriage, not that she was betrothed to someone. And by the way, nobody thinks, which is a whole interesting halacha in and of itself, that if she just slept with someone in between, that would be a problem. Okay, from what I can gauge. Chachamim omrim achat zo v'achat zo asura. Whether it's nisuin, whether it's erusin, she's forbidden. Doesn't matter, okay? As long as she had some formal relationship with someone, either erusin or nisuin, she's forbidden to go back. So now, what does he do with the words hutamah? This is going to be important for our purposes. Elamanim kem acharei asher hutamah, lerabot sota shenistira. It's to teach you, okay, now this is a weird out of context thing, but we've seen this many times, where it doesn't really make sense that it's here, because it doesn't only mean if she was defiled by have relations with this person because she was in a marriage situation, even engagement. So they take it out of context and put it in a different place. And they say it must be referring, this is like an ime no inyan that we saw before. If it's not relevant here, it must be talking about something else. What do they say? L'rabot sota shenistira, that is sota that went into a room alone with a man, we don't know what happened there, is also hutamah. We call her hutamah, which means that's a rayo, which means safek a sota badai, sota safek, a sota definite sota, and a maybe sota are in the same category. They're both considered defiled, which would mean that they would be, again, we compared it, we saw a sota safek, there is a chiyuv of chalitza, and there wasn't by, right? Rav said there isn't one by a sota vadai, and we thought they were two different cases. Now it seems like they're the same. The whole logic of saying it was a rayot was because it says hu tam'ah, also by sota shenistera. So the Gemara very simply answers, my nistera nivala, when it means she went alone in a room, it means she went alone in a room and had relations. We're talking about a sota vadai, to which the Gemara is going to have a few questions, which is number one, amai kare le nistera. So why do you use the term that really means she went into a room alone, but nothing happened? So they say lishnama al yanakat. They didn't want to say it explicitly, right? They always like to, when it gets to topics like this, we kind of say things in euphemisms. It was easier to just say she was alone in the room with the man. You can use your imagination to figure out what would happen. Then the Gemara asks, but still, nivala tuma b'hediktiva. You don't need this verse to tell you about nivala. Because already, if she had relations with him, we already know from the Sota Psukim that it already says hu tam'ah. So you don't need it here. It says explicitly there. So what do they answer? It's to say that there's a lo taseh associated with it as well, meaning in that pasuk it just said vihi nitma'ah. It didn't say there's any lo taseh. Here it says lo yuchal ba'ala rishon lekachta leisha acharei asher hu tam'ah. They learn from there's really two lo tasehs here. One is for the machzir grushato and one is for a sota. And then that you get lashes for it. If we just had the verse in sota, you would have thought it's usher, but not that you get lashes. Here it says you get lashes. Okay. Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, la besota lately. Bafilu zinai nami. My taima, havaya v'ishu k'tiba. Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur doesn't have any lo taseh by a sota, meaning, right, if she, even zanai, if you married someone and then they went and and you divorced them and then they went and were with another man in znut, meaning out of marriage, it's not a problem because it says havaya v'ishut. Okay, it would have to be havaya v'ishut, have to be right through a marriage situation. That's what forbids you to marry her going forward. Okay, but again, that's a whole other topic. We're not going to get, more in depth just because of time right now. So basically, we end up saying Sarav sota asura. We don't compare her to a sota safek, and any questions we ask, we kind of resolve. And we don't compare her to what they tried to do before with the case of the aguna woman, because that's an aguna, right? That's a woman who, it wasn't that she was an adulterer, right? And this is an adulterer. Okay, so, and that was all a rabbinic chumrah. So we're not going to treat it the same. So really, we consider a woman who cheated on her husband as a rayot, which means, again, it's a little different than all the others. She's going to exempt her tzara from yibum because her whole relationship with her husband right now, since she was supposed to get divorced and she didn't, her whole relationship with him was forbidden. Therefore, there's no yibum because there's no point of continuing the legacy of this relationship that was never allowed to be in the first place. Now, since we brought up this machzir grushato, I don't know if it's because we brought it up, but in any case, we're going to ask about that. He now asks a question. Hamachzir grushato misheniseit bamet. What if you slept with, right? You married a woman, then she went and married you divorced her. She went and married someone else. Again, a man, I'm trying to mostly credit women, but anyway, a man marries a woman, they get divorced. Then she goes marry someone else. Then they get divorced. He dies. Something happens. She goes back and marries him, right? Again, against the law. She's not allowed to be married to him. So what's the status if he dies without children now? Does her second wife, right, the second wife of this guy, is she exempt from yibum? Because again, the first wife seemingly shouldn't have to do yibum, although we're going to really question that, whether she needs to do yibum, and the question is, does she exempt her second wife? So, Aliba de Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, I told you we get back to this, lo tibayla. Why? Kevan d'amar Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, tum'ah b'machzir grushato dichtiva. Remember, the tuma of that pasuk was referring, when it talked about the machzir grushato, it was referring to that case. Tuma meant that she married someone in between and was engaged to them. And therefore, tzarata kamoa. Her tzara is just like her. Okay, so basically we're going to say, she is someone who defiled things. She's an erva. This is like Rav said. She's erva because tum'ah relates to the machzir grushato, even though it doesn't really, right? It relates to the fact that she was married to someone in between, but then they basically say because of that, she's defiling, right, her husband. It's to'ava. She can't marry her husband. If she can't marry her husband, she's exempt. Her husband, her tzara is exempt. It's all erva. And then If you want to say, now notice the verse says, and I didn't really stress this when I read it before. It says, to'ava hi. Now he could refer, right, this is, or she is a to'ava, is despicable. Now, what can you learn from that? You can say, hi to'ava ve'em banea to'avim. It's to say specifically her and not her children, meaning her children aren't mamzerim. Okay, that's important to know. It's a forbidden relationship where the child is not a mamzer. Usually forbidden relationship child is a mamzer. It depends on the situation. But hat sarata to'eva. But then you can't derive from here, but not her tzara. No, it's her, not her children. But her and her other wives would be the same because if she's erva, her other wives, the other wives are erva as well. So I'm not asking according to Rabbi Yosef ben Kippur. My question is according to the rabbis. Do we say, since the word tuma in the Machzir Grushato has, but if the word tuma is for Machzir Grushato, like Rabbi Yosef ben Kippur, then this is erva, and then everyone's not forbidden, right? As no one can do yibum, right? They're all exempt from yibum. But if we take the word tuma out of context and say it doesn't belong here, the question is, when we do that, there's two ways in which to view it. So we're going to view those right now. Do we say, even though they took the word out from here and said it really belongs in the sota, do we say, dichtiv mikra yotzei midei pshuto, but even though we take it out, it still belongs there on the simple reading. In other words, in the world of drasha, we're going to take it out. But in the simple reading, it's there, which means it's erva, which means they're all exempt. O dilma kevandi yaker, or do we say, no, we've removed it, it's out of context. It doesn't belong here. It really belongs in sota. And then it really isn't here, which means there's no erva, which means that they're chayav and yibum. Okay, now, so some people say so that was all explaining his questions only according to the rabbis, not Rabbi Yosef ben Kippur. Now we're going to have a different way of understanding his question. Some people say, actually, the question is for sure not according to the rabbis because once you remove tuma from the pasuk, it's gone. It's not there at all. We're now going to question one thing that we said before. We're going to now raise maybe it's not exactly true. So let's see. Really, the tuma belongs here, which would then make it an arayo case. But Rahmana he toava v'lo tzarata toava. When it says toava he, maybe it means she's toava, but not the second wife. Maybe it's a unique halacha here where the second wife wouldn't have that status. O Dilma, or do we say he toava ve'im banat toavim hat tzarata toava? So we have a lot of possibilities here. What's his question? Is it on him or on him? And what exactly is the question? Tani Tua, let's try to learn it from here. This whole sugya, by the way, is going to repeat tomorrow in a bit of a different form, but let's learn it from here. Okay, we don't yet know the context here. A man has yibum to two women right now. There's two wives he's supposed to do yibum with from the same, right? His brother had two wives. One is kshera, one is psula. So the Braita says, if he's going to do chalitza, do it to the disqualified one. If he's going to do yibum, do it to the qualified one. Okay, we don't know what this means, disqualified, qualified. What are we talking about? My kshera, my psula. If we mean, kshera means she can marry anybody she wants. Psula means she's a divorcee, she's a chalutza, right? Someone who did chalitza. She can't marry a kohen. Okay, maybe that's what it is. Now, obviously, she can marry him because we're talking about how he could do yibum with her. So we're talking about a man who's not a kohen. If so, the Gemara says this makes no sense. If she can marry him, what do we care if she can't marry a kohen? It's irrelevant. So, it must be kshera, she's kshera le to him, and psula, she's psula to him. What could be the case where he has two wives that fall to yibum, and one is kshera and one is psula? Because normally if one's psula, it's, right, it exempts the other. So how could it be? Machzir grushato, it's a machzir grushato, his brother returned his divorced wife. And what does it say? Katani, mayami yabem l'kshera. Says the tzara does yibum. That shows that's an answer to our question. Machzir grushato, the tzara is not exempt. She's doing yibum here, even the woman herself, they do chalitza. So they say, no. You can't learn it from here because you misunderstood. Or at least you could read this some other way. Now, go back to the first interpretation. Who cares, right? So Mishum de Rav Yosef. Amar Rav Yosef. This is a great line. This is like the best line of today's daf. Kan shana Rabbi lo yishpoch hadameh barov acharim tzrichim lehem. Don't dump your dirty water because someone else might want it, right? You have clothes you want to get rid of. Don't just dump them in the garbage. Someone might want your clothes that you don't want, right? This can go for many things. What's the issue here? If you have two wives and one was divorced before you married her and one was not, okay? And then you die without kids and then they fall to Yibum to your brother. If your brother's going to do Yibum, he should do Yibum or he can. He can do Yibum really with any one of them, but they say with a kshera. But if he's going to do chalitza, which would mess up a kosher woman, a woman who could marry a Kohen. If now you do chalitza, she can't marry a Kohen anymore. So if you're going to do chalitza, be sensitive. Do it with the woman who already did chalitza or was a divorcee or for whatever reason could marry a Kohen. And then, right, you won't be messing somebody up to marry a Kohen. Otherwise, you're messing up this woman and she can no longer marry a Kohen. Okay, basically, right, someone else might want to marry her and then they'll be stuck and they won't be able to. So anyway, that's a whole interesting thing in and of itself, but we're running late, so we're going to keep going. Tashma, next attempt to answer this question about, is the tzara v'machzir grushato p'tura? Hamachzir grushato misheniseit, hi v'tzarata choletzet. Oh, here it says it exactly, right? There's chalitza, which means they're obviously not exempt. Hi v'tzarata sal kadatach, wait a minute. It says, she entered tzara du chalitza. That for sure isn't the case. Ela ema, oh hi o tzarata. Sorry, no, I said it wrong. This actually shows, the issue here is not necessarily they exempt from Yibum. I forgot to, it's can they do Yibum or do they have to do Chalitza? Okay, because they actually do have to do something, but the question is, can they do Yibum? Now, this seems to say she can't do Yibum. They both have to do Chalitza. To which the Gemara doesn't like this because they say, wait a minute. It said, Hivet Tzarata Choletza, and you change the words to say, oh, he, oh, Tzarata Choletza. If you're going to change the words already, B'lav Terutza Kamataretzle, once you're already changing the words, change it to this. He choletzet, sarata, o choletzet, o mityabemet. Okay? You could say, no, if you're already changing the words, change the words entirely. Maybe she can do chalitza, but her tzara, oh, she can do yibum also. So therefore, again, inconclusive. We don't really have an answer. Now we're moving on to the Rabbi Yochanan asked kind of a very similar question. But we'll see. There's two versions of it, and with that, we'll end. I'm Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Yochanan bai. Rabbi Yochanan asked the following question. Now, here we're talking about the Machzir Grushato. Tzarata mahu. Sounds like the exact same question. So now they say, why don't you ask about her herself? Maybe she could do Yibum. He gufa lo kamabayli. I'm not asking about her. Why? Because that's obvious she can't. If she can't marry her first husband, who she was originally married to, and she can't marry him the second time because she was married to someone in the interim, but yet he was permitted in the first place, well, someone who was forbidden to her because he was the brother of her husband, or for the course, she's not going to be able to marry him, right? And then she would do chalitza instead. My question was about the tzara. Is this kavachomer strong enough to basically exempt her tzara as well from Yibum? Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Manehachi with this one, and he asked the question in a different way. I'm Rabbi Chia bar Abba by Rabbi Yochanan. Now his question was not about the tzara, it was about the machzir grushato, to which the response is, Amar Rabbi Yami v'tibai lach tzarata. Why aren't you asking about her tzara? So he says, tzarata lo kamabayla. I have no questions about her tzara. Obviously, she could do yibum. It's obvious we've had a lot of gymnastics here, right? Obviously, what we questioned before is obvious to me in this version. For sure, the kavachomer wouldn't apply to her tzara. It's not that strong a kavachomer to be able to then apply it. Her tzara, of course, can marry. Ela can do yibum with the brother. Ela hi gufamai. What about her herself? Mi alim kavachomer b'mechol mitzvah olo. Yes, we have a kavachomer that she can't marry the brother, but maybe the mitzvah of yibum overrides that because it's just a kavachomer, and maybe yibum can override, and maybe she could even do yibum with the brother. And that's, so we have two versions of his questions. The question about the machzir grushato is the question about the tzara. And tomorrow you'll see how the Gemara tries to answer this question. Okay, very long dapim, hoping that as we go on, the dapim will be able to be taught in a bit of a shorter manner. Have a Purim Sameach to those who are celebrating Purim today, and a Shabbat Shalom.